This wasn't just a signing, and if you think it was, you're already missing the bigger picture. Because what the Cleveland Browns just did didn't just add a player, it quietly flipped the direction of the entire franchise overnight. And the craziest part? Most people still think this is just about a quarterback. It's not. This is about a decision that could redefine everything we thought we knew about how this team operates, who they trust, and who they've been holding back this entire time. When ShedeurSanders stepped into the spotlight, the conversation was never simple. From the outside, it looked like another young quarterback trying to find his footing. But behind the scenes, there was something very different unfolding, something far more complicated than just wins and losses. Because here, what people don't talk about enough. He didn't walk into a stable system. He didn't inherit a polished offense. He didn't get the luxury most young quarterbacks rely on. Instead, he stepped into pressure. Constant pressure. The kind that exposes players fast. And yet, he didn't break. While critics questioned him, while analysts kept throwing around doubts, and while the noise kept getting louder, he kept showing up. Not perfect, not flawless, but resilient in a way that started turning heads for the right reasons. And that's exactly where things start to get interesting. Because teams don't just invest heavily in players based on hype anymore. Not at this level. Not with everything on the line. Moves like this only happen when something behind the curtain convinces decision makers that they're looking at more than just potential. They're looking at someone they can build around. Someone they're willing to reshape the entire system for. And that's exactly what this feels like. But here, where it takes a turn most people didn't expect. Because the moment this decision was made, it didn't just elevate ShedeurSanders. It also started raising serious questions about everything that came before it. About the decisions, the structure, and even the leadership that had been guiding this team up to this point. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. And not everyone comes out of that conversation looking good. In fact, some of the choices that once seemed justified are now being looked at very differently. Fans are starting to connect dots. Analysts are starting to revisit narratives. And suddenly, what used to be brushed off as growing pains is now being questioned in a whole new light. Because if this move works, if this really is the beginning of something bigger, then it doesn't just mean the Browns got their future right. It might mean they had it right in front of them all along and handled it completely wrong. And that's the part no one is ready to talk about yet. But trust me, they will be. The $80 million number is what everyone keeps repeating, but almost nobody is actually understanding what it really means. Because this wasn't just money being thrown at a quarterback. This was a message, a very loud one, and it wasn't just directed at fans, it was aimed at the entire locker room, the coaching staff, and honestly, the rest of the league. When the Cleveland Browns decided to go all in like this, they weren't just paying for talent. They were making it clear that ShedeurSanders is no longer a question mark. He's the answer. And that changes everything. Because think about how rare this actually is. Teams don't commit at that level unless they've seen something behind the scenes that the public hasn't fully caught on to yet. Something in the way a player handles pressure. The way he reads the game. The way he carries himself when things aren't going his way. That's where this decision was really made. Not on highlight plays, not on stat sheets, but in the moments where most players start to fall apart. And if you look back, that's exactly where Shedeur separated himself. While the situation around him kept getting messy, inconsistent protection, broken plays, constant pressure, he didn't disappear. He adjusted. He stayed composed. And more importantly, he kept competing. That kind of resilience doesn't always show up in numbers, but teams notice it. Front offices notice it. And clearly, the Browns noticed it enough to put everything behind him. But here's the part that people are overlooking. This move wasn't just about rewarding what he's already done. It was about what they believe is coming next. Because you don't make a commitment like this unless you're convinced that once the right pieces are in place, everything is going to look very different. Faster, cleaner, more dangerous. And that's exactly what this signals. It's the organization admitting, without actually saying it, that the problem may not have been the quarterback at all. It may have been everything around him. And now, instead of questioning him, they're removing the excuses. They're taking away the instability, fixing the structure, giving him the kind of environment where there's nowhere left to hide for anyone. Because once you invest like this, expectations change instantly. There's no more wait and see. Now it's about results. Now it's about proving that this belief wasn't misplaced. And that's where the pressure flips. Because for months, maybe even longer, all the pressure was on ShedeurSanders to prove he belonged. Now, the pressure is on the entire organization to prove they were right about him. And if they were, if this really is the player they think he is, then this $80 million decision won't just look smart. It'll look like the moment everything finally started to make sense. But that only works if they fix what was holding him back in the first place. The more you look at how everything unfolded, the harder it becomes to blame the quarterback. Because when people were quick to question ShedeurSanders, they were mostly focusing on surface-level results. A few stalled drives here, a missed opportunity there, without really asking what was happening around him on every single snap. And that's where the real story starts to shift. Because this wasn't a situation where a quarterback walked into a clean system and failed to execute. This was a situation where the system itself was struggling to function. Protection broke down far too often. Plays didn't have time to develop. And when everything collapses that quickly, even the best quarterbacks start looking average. That's just reality in the NFL. You can't evaluate a passer properly when he's constantly under pressure before a route even finishes. You can't expect rhythm when timing is disrupted at the line. And you definitely can't build confidence when every possession feels like survival instead of execution. And yet, that's exactly the environment he was thrown into. The Cleveland Browns' offense wasn't just inconsistent, it was unstable. One drive might show flashes of potential, and the next would completely fall apart. Not because of one mistake, but because multiple pieces weren't working together the way they should. Receivers struggled to create separation at times. The offensive line had moments where it simply couldn't hold up long enough. And when those two issues combine, it forces the quarterback into impossible situations, rushed decisions, broken plays, and constant improvisation. That's not a formula for success. That's a formula for blame. Because when everything around a quarterback starts failing, he's usually the one who ends up taking the heat. It's the easiest narrative to sell. The most visible position always becomes the easiest target. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. Doubts started growing. Conversations started shifting. People began questioning whether he was truly ready, whether he could handle the role, whether the team needed to look elsewhere. But here's the problem with that line of thinking. It ignores context. It ignores the fact that development isn't just about talent, it's about environment, about protection, about support, about putting a player in a position where he can actually succeed instead of constantly fighting just to stay afloat. And slowly, that realization started catching up. Because the more the team reviewed what was happening, the clearer it became that the issues weren't starting under center. They were starting everywhere else. The breakdowns, the missed assignments, the lack of stability. All of it pointed to something bigger, something deeper. And that's when the narrative began to flip. Because once you accept that the quarterback wasn't the core problem, it forces a much tougher question. What if he was actually holding things together more than anyone realized? What if those flashes weren't random, but glimpses of what could happen if everything around him finally worked the way it was supposed to? That's the question the Browns had to answer. And judging by the way they've started moving, it looks like they already have. But realizing the problem is one thing. Fixing it is something else entirely. Fixing the problem is where things usually fall apart for most teams. It's easy to admit something isn't working. It's a lot harder to make the kind of move that actually changes it. And that's exactly why this next step matters more than anything we've talked about so far. Because the Cleveland Browns didn't just acknowledge the issue, they acted on it. And the name that keeps coming up behind the scenes is Rasheed Walker. Now, to casual fans, that might not sound like a headline move. He's not a flashy skill position player. He's not putting up highlight reel numbers. But inside the league, moves like this are the ones that quietly decide whether a quarterback succeeds or fails. Because a left tackle isn't just another position. It's protection, it's timing, it's trust. It's the difference between a quarterback playing freely and a quarterback constantly looking over his shoulder. And if there's one thing that held everything back before, it was exactly that, a protection that couldn't consistently hold up when it mattered most. That's where Walker changes the equation. He's built a reputation as someone who can handle pressure situations, someone who can anchor against elite pass rushers, and most importantly, someone who gives his quarterback just enough extra time to let plays actually develop. And in the NFL, just enough time is everything. One extra second can turn a broken play into a big gain. One clean pocket can turn hesitation into confidence. And confidence is where quarterbacks make the biggest leap. For ShedeurSanders, this isn't just about adding a blocker. It's about finally having stability on the most important edge of the line. It's about knowing that when he drops back, the play has a real chance to unfold the way it was designed. That changes how you read the field. That changes how you move. That changes how aggressive you're willing to be. And suddenly, the same quarterback people were questioning starts looking very different. But here, what makes this move even more important? It proves intent. Because teams that aren't fully committed don't invest in protection like this. They patch things together. They wait. They hesitate. This doesn't feel like hesitation. This feels like a team making a decision and following through on it completely. They've already made their statement with the quarterback. Now they're reinforcing it with the pieces around him. And when those two things start aligning, talent and protection, that's when things can escalate quickly. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. That's when offenses go from inconsistent to dangerous. And if this works the way they expect it to, it won't just fix a weakness. It'll unlock something that's been held back this entire time. Because now, for the first time, there are no excuses left on the most critical part of the field. And once that protection is in place, everything else gets exposed, including what may have really been happening behind the scenes all along. But once you start fixing what's happening on the field, it naturally leads to a much more uncomfortable question. What was happening behind the scenes this whole time? Because moves like this don't happen in isolation. They're usually the result of conversations, disagreements, and internal evaluations that the public never fully sees. And lately, there's been a growing sense, especially among fans and insiders, that something deeper was going on inside the Cleveland Browns organization. Now, to be clear, nothing official has been confirmed. But there's been a lot of buzz. Reports suggest there may have been differences in how ShedeurSanders was being handled early on. Not necessarily anything dramatic or intentional, but enough to raise questions about whether everyone was truly aligned on his role, his development, and the direction of the offense. And when that kind of disconnect exists, even small decisions can start to have big consequences. It's been said that there were moments where the offensive approach didn't fully match his strengths, moments where adjustments came a little too late, moments where the system seemed to expect him to adapt instantly instead of evolving around what he does best. Again, nothing confirmed, but enough speculation to get people talking. Because from the outside, some of the decisions didn't always add up. There were stretches where the offense felt out of rhythm, sequences where it looked like timing and communication weren't fully in sync. And when those patterns repeat, it naturally leads to bigger questions about what's happening internally. Were there disagreements on strategy? Were there mixed signals about leadership? Or was it simply a case of a team trying to figure things out in real time and not getting it right fast enough? No one has given a clear answer. But what has become noticeable is how quickly things seem to be changing now. And that's usually not random. Because when an organization suddenly shifts direction, invests heavily in one player, adjusts key positions, and starts building with a specific vision, it often means something behind closed doors forced that shift. Something made them rethink everything. And here, where it gets even more interesting. Some believe that this wasn't just about improving the roster. It was about correcting course, about realizing that the earlier approach wasn't setting ShedeurSanders up to succeed the way it should have. If that's true, then this isn't just a rebuild. It's a reset. A reset in philosophy, in structure, in trust. And those kinds of resets don't happen quietly. They leave traces in decisions, in changes, and in the way a team suddenly starts moving with urgency. Which is exactly what we're seeing now. The Browns aren't just making upgrades, they're moving with purpose. And when that kind of shift happens this fast, it usually means one thing. Something behind the scenes forced their hand. The only question now is, how deep did that go? Because the answer to that might explain everything that's happening next. And then came the shift that made everything click. Not a loud announcement, not some dramatic press conference, just a quiet change in direction that completely altered how this team operates, and more importantly, who it's built around. The arrival and influence of Todd Monken didn't just tweak the offense, it flipped the entire script. Because from the moment he stepped into the picture, the messaging started to change. The hesitation, gone, the uncertainty, replaced with clarity. And for the first time, it felt like the Cleveland Browns had a coaching voice that was fully aligned with what they were trying to do. Which is build around ShedeurSanders, not question him. That distinction matters more than people realize. Because one of the biggest challenges for any young quarterback isn't just the defense across from him, it's whether the system behind him actually believes in him, whether the play calling fits his strengths, whether the game plan puts him in control instead of forcing him to adjust on the fly every single drive. And that's exactly where things feel different now. With Monken, there's a sense of intention, a sense that the offense isn't being held together week to week, but instead being shaped with a clear identity, roots that develop with purpose, protection schemes that give plays time to breathe, situations where the quarterback isn't reacting to chaos, he's dictating the pace. That's when quarterbacks elevate. That's when confidence turns into production. And for Shedeur, that shift could be everything. Because instead of being asked to survive broken plays, he's now being put in a position to execute designed ones. Instead of constantly adjusting to what's going wrong, he can finally focus on what's supposed to go right. And when that happens, the difference is immediate. But here's what really stands out. It's not just the scheme, it's the belief behind it. Every move, every adjustment, every decision since this shift has pointed in one direction, full commitment. No mixed signals, no hedging language, just a clear message that this offense is his to lead. And when a coach operates like that, it sends a ripple effect through the entire team. Linemen play with more confidence because they know what's expected. Receivers run sharper routes because timing actually matters. The entire unit starts moving like one system instead of disconnected pieces. That kind of alignment is rare. And when it finally clicks, it doesn't just improve performance, it accelerates it. Which brings us to the part that can't be ignored. Because shifts like this don't happen without something forcing the change in the first place. Whether it was internal evaluation, external pressure, or simply a realization that things weren't working the way they should, something pushed this organization to rethink its approach. And now, with Monken leading the offense, that new approach is becoming impossible to miss. Everything feels faster, sharper, more intentional. And for the first time, it feels like the quarterback, the system, and the coaching are all moving in the same direction. which is exactly what this team has been missing. And if that alignment holds, then what we're about to see next might look completely different from anything that came before. Even with everything starting to line up, the noise hasn't stopped. If anything, it's gotten louder. Because the moment a team commits this heavily to one direction, the spotlight intensifies, and that's exactly what's happening around ShedeurSanders right now. Every performance gets dissected, every decision gets questioned, and every comparison gets pushed into the conversation, whether it makes sense or not. That's just how it works. The media thrives on uncertainty. It thrives on debate. And when there's a young quarterback at the center of a major shift inside a franchise like the Cleveland Browns, it becomes the perfect storm for speculation. You've probably seen it already. Different names being thrown into the mix, different scenarios being floated. Some analysts suggesting competition, others questioning long-term stability. It's a cycle, one that repeats any time a team makes a bold move and people aren't fully convinced yet. And to be fair, that skepticism isn't always coming from a bad place. Sometimes it's just caution. Because investing heavily in a quarterback always comes with risk. No matter how promising things look, there's always that lingering question, what if it doesn't work? But here, where perception and reality start to separate. Because while the outside world continues to debate possibilities, inside the organization, the direction seems far more clear. The moves we've seen, the investment, the protection upgrades, the coaching alignment, all point toward one thing. Commitment. Not hesitation, not uncertainty. Commitment. And that's something the media doesn't always fully reflect, because uncertainty creates more engagement than clarity ever will. So instead, the narrative keeps shifting. One day it's about competition. The next, it's about comparisons. Then it's about hypothetical replacements or alternative options. Names get mentioned, stories get built, and suddenly it starts to feel like there's more doubt than direction. But when you actually step back and look at the bigger picture, the reality looks very different. This isn't a team experimenting. This is a team building. Building protection, building structure, building an identity around a quarterback they clearly believe in. And those kinds of moves don't happen by accident. They happen when an organization has already made its internal decision, even if the outside world hasn't caught up yet. If you love real talk and fearless NFL breakdowns, hit subscribe and join Coach Speaks. Which is why all the noise, all the debates, all the constant comparisons, they don't carry the same weight they used to. Because at some point, what happens on the field starts to speak louder than what's being said off it. And if everything that's being put in place, right now actually comes together, then the conversation won't be about whether ShedeurSanders is the guy. It'll be about how long it took everyone else to realize it. But that moment only comes when potential turns into results. And that's what all of this has been building toward. Because when you step back and connect every piece, the investment, the protection upgrades, the shift in coaching, and the clear direction, it doesn't feel like a team experimenting anymore. It feels like a team preparing for something bigger. Something the rest of the league might not be fully ready for. The Cleveland Browns aren't moving cautiously. They're moving with intent. Every decision points in the same direction, and at the center of it all is ShedeurSanders. A quarterback who, up to this point, hasn't had the luxury of stability. But that's changing. And that's what makes this moment different from anything that came before. Because talent alone doesn't shift a franchise. We've seen that too many times. What changes everything is when talent finally meets the right environment, when the system, the protection, and the belief all line up at the same time. That's when things accelerate. That's when growth turns into production. And that's when the conversation around a player changes, almost overnight. For Shedeur, this isn't about proving he can survive anymore. It's about showing what happens when he doesn't have to. Because for the first time, it feels like everything is being built for him instead of around the chaos. The offense has direction. The protection has purpose. The coaching has clarity. And when all of that comes together, the margin for error shrinks, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Because now, there are no more easy excuses left. If it works, it validates everything. If it doesn't, it raises even bigger questions. But that's exactly what makes this so compelling. Because deep down, there's a growing sense that this is going to work. That the flashes we've seen weren't random. That the resilience he showed wasn't temporary. That everything leading up to this point was just the setup. And now, the real version is about to show up. The version with time in the pocket. The version with a system designed to highlight strengths instead of expose weaknesses. The version that doesn't have to fight through chaos just to stay in the game. And if that version delivers the way the Browns clearly believe it will, then the rest of the league is going to have a problem. Because teams can prepare for talent. They can game plan against systems. But it's a lot harder to stop a quarterback who has already proven he can handle the worst and is finally stepping into something close to the best. So the question is whether change is coming. It already has. The real question is, what happens when a quarterback who's been tested by everything finally gets exactly what he needs? Because if the answer is what it looks like it might be, then the league isn't just dealing with a new starter. They're dealing with the beginning of something much bigger. And by the time everyone realizes it, it might already be too late.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.